Hey everyone, welcome back to JDB Selects. Now before we get into this week's video, I just wanted to acknowledge that we're so close to hitting 3,000 subscribers, so if you find value or entertainment in my content, please subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate every single person that's subscribed. And now that that's out of the way, let's get stuck into my round 23 tips for the 2022 NRL season. Going over last week's results, we managed to tip 6 out of 8 games. No excuses, but the Panthers lost more key players late and were held scoreless by Melbourne. The Gold Coast Titans finally got up and completely embarrassed the Sea Eagles. As always, we go again this week. Round 23 gets underway with the 5th-placed South Sydney Rabbitohs taking on the 1st-placed Penrith Panthers at Accor Stadium, Sydney. The Rabbitohs held the Eels scoreless in a clinical 26-0 thrashing. The Eels offered minimal threat in attack, and South Sydney were able to absorb the pressure and convert their field position into points at will. The Panthers were also held scoreless at home for the first time since 2015 by the Melbourne Storm, going down 16-0. The Panthers looked clunky in attack with so many key players out, however their defence and line speed were the only shining lights. South Sydney have only beaten Penrith once in their last 8 encounters, however, Souths have only lost one of their last 10 games at Accor Stadium. Based on what we saw from the Panthers last week, it's a really tough game to tip. I think Penrith will be much stronger if Edwards and Fisher-Harris are back in the starting side, however I feel South Sydney have all the momentum and can get the win by 1 to 12 points. I'm expecting a close game. In their last 10 encounters, 7 have been decided by 8 points or less. The first Friday fixture has the 2nd-placed North Queensland Cowboys taking on the 13th-placed New Zealand Warriors at Queensland Country Bank Stadium, Townsville. The Cowboys went down to the Sydney Roosters in their SCG debut. Both sides completed below 75%, however North Queensland were outmuscled and outworked by the Roosters' forward pack and struggled to gain any field position. The Warriors came out to play against the Bulldogs in Auckland last week and stayed engaged for the full 80. Despite allowing the Bulldogs back into the contest with the score locked midway through the second half, the Warriors put on 3 tries in the last 6 minutes to comfortably win 42-18. The results have been extremely tight between these two sides in recent times, with both teams' last win coming by a single point. The Cowboys have won 6 of their last 7 home games, and the Warriors on the other hand will be looking for their first ever win at Queensland Country Bank Stadium. Because of this, I'm going to take the Cowboys by 1 to 12 points. I think they'll lift being back in Townsville, especially after a loss. And finally on Friday, the 6th-placed Brisbane Broncos are up against the 4th-placed Melbourne Storm at Suncorp Stadium, Brisbane. The Broncos snapped a potential 3-game slide with a 28-10 win over the Newcastle Knights despite only completing at 69% and having 47% of possession. The outside backs were impressive for Brisbane, with winger Selwyn Cobbo scoring his maiden first-grade hat-trick. The Storm managed to take down a depleted Panthers outfit in Penrith last week, holding the defending premiers scoreless at home for the first time since 2015. Cameron Munster continued to shine at fullback, while the likes of Asofa Solomona, Grant and Smith also stepped up. Brisbane have a horrible record against Melbourne, having only won 2 of their last 23 games and go into this one having lost the last 11 straight. The Broncos last beat the Storm in Brisbane back in 2009. The Broncos haven't looked good in recent weeks, and I think Melbourne can put a decent score on them, so I'm taking the Storm 13+. The first game on Super Saturday has the 7th-placed Parramatta Eels hosting the 12th-placed Canterbury Bulldogs at CommBank Stadium, Sydney. The Eels failed to score a single point against the Rabbitohs last week. The Eels couldn't capitalise on any of their limited opportunities. The Bulldogs were pumped by the mighty New Zealand Warriors in Auckland and looked back to their old ways. The Dogs failed to get off any offence, with 2 of their 3 tries coming from Warriors' errors. Parramatta have won 4 of the last 5 against Canterbury but were sensationally upset by 30 points earlier this season and will be hoping to exact their revenge. The Dogs have a terrible record at CommBank, having only won 3 of their 17 appearances at the ground. I never feel confident tipping them, but I am going to take the Eels 13+. I think they have more to play for and could really use a big game to boost their points difference. The second Saturday fixture has the 10th-placed Manly Sea Eagles up against the 3rd-placed Cronulla Sharks at 4 Pines Park, Sydney. The Sea Eagles were completely embarrassed by the Gold Coast Titans. As I mentioned last week, the Sea Eagles have become a completely disjointed side since the rainbow jersey walkout, and in my opinion it has cost them their season. The Sharks proved to be far too strong for the Tigers and further cemented their position at the top of the ladder. The 24-point winning margin closes the gap to North Queensland and a potential second-place finish. Manly have a great record over Cronulla, having won 18 of the past 24 games including a 7-game winning streak at Four Pines Park, with the Sharks' last win at the venue coming all the way back in 2008. It's hard to tip anything else other than a Sharks win, especially after last week. However, I am going to take Manly by 1 to 12 points, as Manly do have a great record at the ground and are my upset of the round. And finally, on Saturday, the 8th-placed Sydney Roosters welcome the last-placed West Tigers to the Sydney Cricket Ground. The Roosters continued their late resurgence into the top 8 with a convincing 32-18-point victory over North Queensland. The Roosters got around James Tedesco's 200th game. Their forward pack were outstanding and provided quality platforms for their outside backs. The Tigers never looked like they troubling the Cronulla Sharks, conceding 30 points for the 6th time this season. The Chooks have won 15 of their last 16 games against Wests and go into this one having won 5 straight. The two sides have only met at the SCG once, back in 2019, which resulted in a 42 points to 12 victory for the Roosters. I don't think I need to say anything else other than Roosters 13+. They are looking deadly in attack and should blow the Tigers off the park. Sunday football gets going with the 11th-placed St George Illawarra Dragons hosting the 16th-placed Gold Coast Titans. The Dragons were unable to stage a second-half comeback, going down by just 2 points in eerily similar fashion to how they controversially beat the Raiders back in round 16. The Titans managed their first win in 3 months with a dominant 44-24-point grubbing. Once the Titans got on a roll, there was no stopping them, scoring 7 tries in the process. The two sides have played 4 games at WIN Stadium, and unfortunately for Titans fan, St George has won all 4. The Titans, however, do go into this game having 3 straight against the Dragons. Pretty tough game to call, and with both teams only playing for pride, it could go either way. However, I am going to take the Dragons at home by 1 to 12 points. And the final game of round 23 sees the 14th-placed Newcastle Knights up against the 9th Canberra Raiders. The Knights went down to the Broncos 28 points to 10 at Suncorp, in a game where Newcastle had a greater share of possession and completed at 80% compared to Brisbane's 69%. The Raiders managed to keep their finals chances alive with a gutsy 2-point victory. As they have been prone to all season, the Raiders were outscored in the second half and were potentially lucky not to have been penalised in the dying stages. The two sides have met in Newcastle since 2017, in a game that the Knights won 34 points to 20, and prior to that their last meeting in Newcastle resulted in draw with both sides locked at 24 all. I think the Knights can be competitive here, but I'm going to tip the Raiders 1 to 12+, who still have it all to play for, and a big win over Newcastle could potentially get their points difference very close to even. So in summary, my tips for round 23 are the Rabbitohs 13+, the Cowboys 1 to 12, the Storm and Eels 13+, the Sea Eagles 1 to 12, the Roosters 13+, and the Dragons and Raiders 1 to 12. Let me know in the comments below who you're tipping this week, and be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed this week. Catch you all next week.